Hi, my name is Natalie Castro, and today I'll be talking about metacognition and artificial intelligence and what those things look like when they overlap. I'm interested in talking about this at length because the aspects presented will consider the possibilities of fostering unique skill sets for students in the future and developing an innovative learning environment in response to generative AI. As this presentation is prepared, articles are beginning to develop which consider this overlap, but there's still a relatively large gap in understanding how these play into each other. So I'll be presenting on 4 different sections. First, I will define metacognition through Flavel's lens, then consider AI in higher education more broadly. Next, I'll talk about the connection between metacognition and AI, so what this overlap looks like in the literature, and then I'll provide a rather extensive list of resources and a bibliography for the presentation. First, I'd like to preface with a quote from Dari and colleagues. In our rapidly evolving world, educational institutions face the challenge of imparting every technical skill required for the future. This notion is not new. However, the development of artificial intelligence introduces new ways of interacting with technology, information, and its open access. But with that in mind, let's first define metacognition. According to Flavel 1979, it's an understanding of one's individual cognitive processes. Some refer to this as thinking about thinking, but this involves planning, monitoring, and evaluating the learning under one's individual control. So it's much larger than just reflecting on one's own thinking. It's tied to one's own internal mental representation of reality, which consists of 4 parts: the problem's initial state, the problem's goal state, how they will get from reaching the initial state to the goal state, and then the constraints on this solution. Metacognition considers how students engage and work through different problems. In addition, it considers study material, study habits, ladder engagement with the course material, and so on. So while Flavel defines some original understandings about metacognition, there's less of a general consensus in the literature about its components. However, the following elements are included in the majority of definitions. First is the knowledge of one's knowledge. What does one know? What does one not know? And are they able to recognize the gaps in their knowledge through cognitive and affective states? A cognitive state is a state of mind an individual is in while completing a particular activity, while an affective state is the emotional influences while completing the task. Finally, the third component is the ability to monitor and regulate one's knowledge and affective states. So without the ability to know what they don't know or to recognize how to transform the problem state to the goal state, metacognition isn't occurring during the learning process. So now let's consider how these components of metacognition specifically apply to learning. I'd like to start with a few definitions. The first is metacognitive knowledge, what a learner understands about their learning process and one's internal stored world knowledge. This is informed by media, cultural experiences, current events, and things of the like. Metacognitive skills is the capacity to manage activities related to a task, problem, or situation. This is also known as cognitive regulation in some sources. This is what I was describing prior when a student may be recognizing how to get from point A to point B and what capacities of their own they have to do so. Point B, so to say, may be understood as a metacognitive goal, or the desired outcomes or objectives of a cognitive pursuit. For each student, this will appear differently dependent on the goals of the class, what knowledge they already possess, and their value perception of the material. Verbalization I'll introduce here because I believe it's crucial to the overlap of metacognition and AI. So we'll get more into that later, but for now, the definition of verbalization is the report that a student makes at any point from getting to their metacognitive goals. This may present itself as a student either literally verbalizing or developing a form of information representation. For example, if a student is reviewing a concept and their metacognitive goal is to study module A, they will use their metacognitive knowledge and skills to select a study habit. Let's say the student decided to create a concept map. They're illustrating their metacognitive knowledge through a visualization. Even though this process isn't directly spoken, they're still engaging with the knowledge to achieve their goals through a form of verbalization. So what is the benefit of metacognition in the classroom? Students are able to identify their knowledge gaps, adjust their learning strategies, develop learner autonomy, and increase their academic performance. This is especially true in online learning environments. Knowing these benefits and core definitions, what are the potential equity concerns of metacognition in the learning environment? First, students may not be aware that they are using metacognitive strategies. Students who are first generation or from underrepresented groups are less likely to utilize metacognitive strategies, thus at a disadvantage in being able to capitalize on these skills. This is why it's important to model these skills in the classroom to support students in both recognizing and developing their metacognitive skills in the context of higher education. Students in the age of AI need to learn how to learn, especially when the tangible product of learning may be craftily stitched together using a variety of online tools without using deep critical thinking or metacognitive skills. Next, I'll be presenting some strategies for how to incorporate metacognition from the student side and the instructor side to support effective learning and competency building in the classroom. Using constructive strategies like this will support students in finding value in their learning, potentially increasing a form of motivation to deeply engage with the material versus creating a digital facade of competency. Examples of cognitive strategies a student can use are self-testing, retrieval practices, and monitoring of learned knowledge. Flashcards may be useful, however, these focus more on rote memorization, which is not a constructive strategy, as it does not foster opportunities for deep engagement with the material. To create constructive opportunities, a student may want to create a study plan and with adequate time and space to do so, and their potential for using metacognitive skills. So before introducing different instructor-centered strategies, I would like to preface with 3 tenets of learning activities that will foster metacognition. The first is that metacognitive instruction should be introduced with the content matter, so in tandem. Second, the learner should be aware if any course material is a particular metacognitive strategy. And third, the learning activity should utilize a combination of activities that draw on the learner's metacognitive skills to complete the task. Instructors may utilize constructive strategies to nudge students into the zone of proximal development to maintain learning growth. Examples of constructive strategies instructors may use are utility value interventions, building time for metacognitive work into the course, providing voluntary but originally for-credit metacognitive activities in coursework, providing sample study sets, and self-quizzing opportunities. Some additional strategies are a combination of opening and exit strategies. For example, an exit strategy may collect points of student confusion at the end of the lecture and then open the next lecture with some time dedicated to answering student-generated questions, or providing summaries of the coursework or reactivating prior course concepts. Additional exit strategies pull on the concept of verbalization through developing concept maps, a quick think, pair, share, or space to reflect on steps to complete an upcoming assignment. Instructors may also provide feedback to students in recognizing the challenging nature of tasks and potential heuristics to completing this assignment. As mentioned earlier, first-generation students and underrepresented groups are less likely to engage in these metacognitive strategies and may not have a mentor to introduce such scaffolding. In addition, the instructor may prompt the student to reflect during assignments about their confidence on a particular question, any points of confusion, or how their disciplinary knowledge may add value to their current coursework. This may be especially useful in more broad courses and things like that. So some specific assignments to utilize these constructive strategies in the classroom are collaborative note-taking, 1-minute papers, think, pair, share, concept mapping, role-playing scenarios, self-assessments, student-generated test questions, or peer review. And I should note also that if you're following along in the slides, A lot of these assignments are linked and provide a variety of information there as well. It's true for the following slides. Now that we have a brief overview about what metacognition is and ways to incorporate it into the classroom, let's consider how AI is shaping educational and labor landscapes. Let's start with defining generative artificial intelligence so we share an understanding. AI is a mix of computational and natural language processing techniques to generate meaningful content from training data. It is a tool to produce written, illustrated, or vocal responses to input prompts. These are built on a long history of natural language processing and concepts from cognitive science. AI has impacted students' ability to complete assignments and learn. It has put into question ways of learning and how ways of learning and ability are assessed. Some of the core concerns of this discussion are: what type of skills do students need today? What type of skills will students need in the future? How will learning objectives shift in the future with AI? How does the design of assessments change? How should AI be regulated and supported in the classroom? These questions are important to address because of the uncertain AI features. Its rapid development, early regulated state, and open access nudges technology policies and learning consideration into an AI-oriented state. In a study published in Labor Economics, Alexieva and colleagues found an increase in job postings with AI in the job description, and a wage premium on these jobs as well. So with metacognition, advances in the cognitive sciences, computational sciences, robotics, and artificial intelligence provide excellent tools and techniques for detecting, measuring, and modeling how metacognition and cognition complexly interact with each other. As I noted earlier, this isn't the first rapid change in education as a result of technology. What's different about this is that AI provides a facade of human cognition, unlike prior tools. There are multiple impacts of AI on a student's metacognition, but I would like to first present two considerations. The first, AI with proper prompts may be able to scaffold a student's metacognition and develop their skills in an anytime, anywhere sort of fashion. This may be particularly useful for students who work a lot during the school year or may not be physically near campus or in the same time zone to join office hours. However, the digital divide also must be of concern here. A student needs reliable internet access to engage with AI in this fashion. Second, students who possess metacognitive skills prior to their AI use may have a greater motivation to resist distractions for effective engagement. In this case, it's especially important to consider which types of students who may already possess these metacognitive skills. So to consider how AI may additionally impact student metacognition, I'd like to go back to a concept introduced in 1960 by J.C. Licklider, the human-computer symbiosis. Posited by Licklider, he said that computers may alleviate the cognitively menial or routine tasks which fill the intervals between decisions to support human efficiency. This concept was subsequently built on in human-centered computing literature and earned the name distributed cognition in some senses. At the point of this work, Licklider noted that relative to men, computing machines are very fast and very accurate, but they are constrained to perform only one or a few elementary operations at a time. However, as we now know, AI can perform more than just elementary operations. So how does this understanding on the human-computer symbiosis change with artificial intelligence? AI may now complete tasks beyond just the clerical, but develop robust coding strategies, author compositions, and interact like a human. The role of technology is shifted. It can now engage in processes at the core of decision-making and creation itself. So what does this new human-computer symbiosis look like? AI can influence our perspectives and what we know about the world, which in turn grants them a certain level of agency to modify our environment through these interactions. Then, attempting to frame AI use as a simple duality such as machine versus tool or tool versus object, becomes ineffective when considering how to leverage AI for socially shared regulation of learning. This quote came from Jinhee and colleagues. So, to consider how to integrate AI, knowing that it's beyond just a clerical tool, students need conversation and guidance about how to recognize the constructive use cases for utilizing AI. As Shelley Druinsky says, having these conversations with students while we are still learning about what Gen AI will be able to do and can help ease our students and our own anxieties and help make us all a part of this future rather than observers of it. Conversations that create environments of care may ask questions of the students about how they perceive AI, what emotions it may evoke, how they currently use it, operationalizing acceptable use cases, and identifying potential ethical issues. By engaging with conversations with students, a more transparent learning environment is developed. In addition, having these conversations is holding space for students to verbalize how they feel about this new technology. This is a core tenet of metacognition. Ohio State University provided a framework to build conversations of care. They recommend an instructor to integrate transparency and collaboration, root the conversation in knowledge of AI technologies. Through this, the instructor is able to model critical thinking about new technologies and thus developing one's metacognitive knowledge about it. I've collected some tools that may help when developing an AI syllabus statement. I'll certainly be bookmarking these for later. The first is Chris Hurd's interactive AI syllabus tool. You're prompted through the questions and then it formats your answers into a syllabus statement. It's almost metacognitive in that sense. Next is the CU Boulder Center for Teaching and Learning sample syllabus statements. These are informed by the AI assessment scale and objectives for the particular course. CU Boulder's TTL also provides scaffolding for co-creating an AI use policy and how to moderate these conversations with students. This is the AI assessment scale I mentioned in the last slide from CU Boulder's TTL. It's written by Perkins, Furs, Rowe, and McBaugh, and their website's linked in the speaker notes as well in the bibliography. This scale provides scaffolding for learning objectives and assignments to give language to what type of AI use is appropriate and what the expectations are for completing a particular task. The 5 scales are no AI, students can't use AI at all. AI planning, students may use AI to brainstorm but have completed the majority of the tangible product themselves. AI collaboration, students may use the AI to complete specific tasks, but the student must take onus for the content submitted. Full AI, the student may use AI at their discretion or per the ask of the assignment. The goal of full AI is to utilize it to achieve their goal state. And finally, AI exploration. Students are expected to use AI creatively to solve tasks and be transparent with the instructor as they do so. This transparency at all 5 levels on the scale is important as it scopes the student when selecting their potential metacognitive skills to achieve their goal state. AI use may vary by discipline, and this scale provides students with the ability to select particular aspects of their knowledge to complete the task at hand. So now let's consider the technical affordances of AI. This encompasses both literally and implied use cases perceived by the student at any given time. So almost in a sense, operationalizing what their metacognitive skills may be in tandem with AI. But first, I would like to define an affordance relying on another HCC-oriented definition. Published by Don Norman in 1988, this operationalizes an affordance as perceived properties that may or may not actually exist, suggestions or clues as to how to use the properties. The affordance can also be dependent on the experience, knowledge, culture, or culture of the actor, and it can either make the action easier or more difficult. I'll provide a short example here outside of digital technology. So think about the cheesy red and blue glasses you may have gotten for a 3D movie in like the early 2000s. When you look at them, you'll perceive what their different colors are suggesting, and they may have a particular use. However, unless you know that the use case is seeing something to appear in 3D, you may be confused. The physical build that their glasses will then suggest that they can be worn around your face, but in the same sense, this design may be challenging to fit if someone is already wearing glasses. They don't fit, it's blurry, it's a mess. But essentially, an affordance is through the perceived and suggested qualities of a design, which will indicate particular use cases and frictions for a user of that technology. However, these traits aren't always positive. Consider the affordances of hostile architecture, for an example. So, with respect to AI, affordances are more complex than what 3D glasses may suggest. Educators must encourage students to think about their thinking, placing the onus of learning back on the student to become more autonomous learners. In addition, online learning does not afford immediate communication with the student, which may cause later confusions or barriers to a student learning subsequent content material. However, AI affords a way for students to engage with the material and verbalize their thinking at every step in the assignment completion. The interaction of AI and other digital technologies create an online learning environment that places great autonomy on the student if they would like to deeply engage with their content. Now, I'll provide a short list from the literature about speculated affordances of AI. The first is decreased perception of task difficulty. The student is walked through a particular assignment, making something which otherwise would have generated a lot of student questions and probably a trip to office hours. Next, many citations suggest AI use may increase academic performance. Their rationale is that the increased efficiency, personalized feedback, and immediate responses may support a student in an online learning environment greatly. This interaction inherently prompts students to verbalize, nudging students to reflect on what they know, how they can get there, and in what ways their resources may be able to support them. Processes like this will encourage students to self-reflect on the work that has been created. Others suggest that AI may be able to foster personal motivation through this kind of increased access to learning opportunities and multiple forms of instructional representations. This combination provides autonomy to learners, and more so in online environments. However, these processes may easily develop a facade that the student has learned, but in reality, they've relied too heavily on AI-generated content. AI may also afford some harms to certain groups of students through narrative representation or misinformation. I will go over two general types of harms here: sociocultural harms and harms which are specific to learning. The sociocultural harms, which may be induced as a result of AI usage, are broad. These consist of misinformation, privacy risks, bias, unable to understand the language, and potential for social isolation. Because AI is generating text and not directly reading websites and subsequently citing their sources, its misinformation is presented rather confidently. For subject matter experts, this may be obvious. However, students who are not versed in the literature or nuances of a particular discipline may not know the extent of AI misinformation. A second concern is privacy risks. This covers both FERPA data, but student data more broadly. AI tools develop a persona of someone, and in their training data, which already may be laden with personal information. The bias risks, generally related to sociocultural harms, are extensively documented. It is known to align more with Western ways of speaking, and even within this, there's nuance in the language AI uses, suggesting power-subordinate relationships. This list could extend greatly. In addition, AI is unable to interpret socio-emotional cues, suggesting that students may struggle to engage meaningfully with the AI. AI also introduces the potential for social isolation. This may in some cases be exacerbated in online classes. Finally, the environmental harm of AI is detrimental and disproportionately impacts those who are already marginalized. And if you'd like more information on the types of biases and harms caused by AI, I have some papers linked in the speaker notes from Dev et al., Bender, Leidinger, and then MIT's Explain Generative AI Environmental Impact. Now, let's consider some of the harms that are directly related to learning. The first and most common concern is the lack of critical thinking. If a student becomes overly reliant, this may create a lack of information engagement. So when they're collating sources or working through debugging code, They may have a decreased learner motivation because their work is superficially recreated when using AI. This may be in part because AI may serve as a distraction for students. Other cases may result in increased plagiarism or skipping the learning. The earlier part of this presentation has considered how a potential use for AI in education is for metacognitive scaffolding. However, these harms are not as immediately known to students and may increase over time. So knowing these affordances, harms, and definitions of metacognition, does metacognition change the way students interact with AI? Yes, metacognitive support will promote critical thinking skills, reducing a potential direct reliance on AI and questioning of the outputs. Students with this support are also more likely to use AI in a way that is constructive and serve as complementary to their knowledge. I argue here that the use of metacognition for students will create a more productive human-computer symbiosis. As the glider illustrated, distributed cognition in the form of AI may support student learning, but without the appropriate scaffolds, this may ultimately harm their learning trajectories. So to appropriately scaffold the students' learning experiences, some sources from Utah State, Ohio State, and the Times Higher Education recommend 4 levels of scaffolding: awareness, planning, monitoring, and evaluation. The first is awareness. The student needs to know how their cognitive skills impact their particular use of AI. The next is planning. The student should use self-awareness to delegate tasks between themselves and AI. Throughout this, the student will have to monitor the progress of their work to a particular metacognitive goal. After task completion, the student will reflect on what went well and what did not. So to support this scaffolding, the student may ask themselves or be prompted in an assignment at each of the following stages. So for awareness, what is it that I'm trying to achieve on this task? Planning, what types of areas do I need to look out for when using this AI tool on this type of task? Monitoring, am I making progress towards my objectives? What biases may be influencing my judgment? Evaluation, could I have made better use of the AI on the task? What should I do differently next time? What tool did I use? What prompt was used to generate the outcomes? Was it successful? What revisions to the prompt were needed to achieve your outcome? Did the output have any bias or misinformation? How did you monitor your progress? And would you use this AI tool again for a similar task? Answering these questions in any form for students is a type of verbalization which will support their metacognition. Malik and Malik outlined 4 roles that AI may assume. These are tutor, learner, team coach, and simulation. These roles support students in different learning activities and ways of scaffolded verbalization. The authors provide an extensive outline of prompts that utilize the affordances of AI rather well, and also do recognize the potential mishaps or the shortcomings of AI. I won't go into much detail here, however, they have made like a website for each one of these roles, and they've also put it into a rather lengthy paper, which I found helpful. So now let's do just a brief literature review just to see where it's at in 2 different journals. The first is the Metacognition and Learning Journal. And so as of June 3rd, the journal had published 16 articles that discuss artificial intelligence. This ranges from 2014, but the most are published after 2022. And many articles demonstrate a future of AI, but do not deeply explore or motivate their beliefs in the article. Only 3 of the articles explored AI at length. And these brief articles discuss that AI can increase personalization, and through that, it can almost learn the learner. The other journal is Journal of Artificial Intelligence in Education. As of that same date, this journal had only 12 articles that discuss both metacognition and AI in higher education. Many of these articles do elaborate on the use of metacognitive strategies in combination with AI, more so than that of the metacognition and learning articles. These articles do not elaborate as much about the metacognition note that AI can support, but they, in a sense, almost like datafied the learning experience and was using trace data or other aspects of student learning to almost guess what metacognitive state the student was in. So now I'd like to go over a few assignment resources that will foster metacognition in AI. These are Kate Mondlock's Turning Point assignment, which prompts students to reflect the way they learned the content. This is relevant to AI and can relate back to those 4 scaffolding questions. However, this asks the student to reflect on a broad range of resources and their metacognitive skills while completing the assignment. From the WAC Publishing House, they provide a general goal for how students may use ChatGPT on an undergraduate course project. These are aligned with SMART goals, which closely align with metacognition. And SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Some more general guides are the Professors at Play AI Playbook. This includes ideas for writing assignments. In addition, there's also sources that look at teaching frameworks for metacognition and how to use metacognition for AI. The final 2 links on this slide are collected from the University of Sydney, and they use a Canvas module to present a rather lengthy resource of how students are using AI and what purposes they believe it may be helpful for learning. And then also on the instructor side, but it's more of a focus on assessment. And then on kind of a side note with assessment, at the end of the speaker notes are resources for developing authentic assessments, which a few of the sources mentioned that these are a core strategy for incorporating metacognition in AI. However, I decided not to discuss it at length in the presentation. So these final slides are the linked resources used in the presentations. The CTL pages are provided both here, but also in the bibliography, but I thought it would be helpful to have it with the title. I thought it would be helpful to have it with the title to see also who is talking about what. And then here's the bibliography. I'll just flip through these quickly. And all of these links throughout the presentation and the speaker notes are hyperlinked. So if you see a particular page, you're welcome to, you won't have to copy down the link. But thank you so much. I'm really interested in the pursuit of metacognition and AI, especially because AI, while there's this concern about it being able to duplicate student learning, it isn't necessarily able to necessarily reason at the level of metacognition, which is where in this case, the student may be able to bring in a new nuanced perspective and these considerations. But thank you. My name is Natalie Castro. I'm currently a graduate research assistant fulfilling at the Division of Continuing Education Online Credit. But in the fall of 2025, I'll be starting my PhD. Thank you.